In the spring of 1992, a queue of men in ill-fitting suits waited outside a marble building on 19th Street in Washington, D.C., not for visas, not for aid packages, but to sign the paperwork making the Russian Federation a dues-paying member of the International Monetary Fund. 6 months earlier, those same men would have called it an instrument of capitalist subversion. They would not have been wrong. The irony ran deep, embarrassingly deep. In July 1944, at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, Soviet delegates had sat at the very founding table of the IMF and the World Bank. They helped draft the rules. Then Stalin studied the fine print, independent audits, open financial books, voting structures calibrated to Western capitals. He let the deadline pass. The Soviet Union never ratified. For 47 years after that, the IMF was the enemy, a Wall Street Trojan horse designed to pry open economies and strip developing nations of sovereignty. Soviet textbooks said so. Soviet economists repeated it loudly at every international forum they attended. Then December 25, 1991 arrived. Mikhail Gorbachev's resignation address lasted 11 minutes. That evening, the red hammer and sickle flag over the Kremlin Senate Tower came down, and the old Russian tricolor, last flown in 1917, went up in its place. What descended with that flag was a $66 billion hard currency debt, a ruble in freefall, and an industrial economy that had been running on ideology instead of profit for 7 decades. Boris Yeltsin's government needed hard currency immediately. The arithmetic was brutal. Bread lines were forming in cities that had launched satellites. State enterprises couldn't meet payroll. Foreign creditors were circling. The IMF, that old enemy, was the only institution with both the capital and the international credibility to unlock Western rescue loans. Pride is a luxury. Russia in 1992 had neither. On April 27, 1992, Russia and 14 other former Soviet republics were admitted to the IMF and the World Bank in a single ceremony. The price of admission was written in a term that sounded surgical: shock therapy. Rapid price liberalization. Sweeping budget cuts. Mass privatization of state assets. It was called therapy because the alternative was considered worse. The men in the ill-fitting suits got their membership cards. What followed? The ruble crisis of 1998, the oligarch auctions that handed Soviet industry to well-connected insiders for kopecks on the ruble, the decade Russia still calls simply the 90s, is another story entirely. The image that stays is smaller than all of that: Stalin's empty chair at Bretton Woods, finally filled, 48 years too late to matter on his terms. The through line is simpler than the story makes it look. An institution was built in 1944. One side helped write the rules, then walked away because the rules were honest about who they favored. For 47 years that refusal was dressed up as principle. Then the money ran out. The same institution, the same fine print, the same asymmetric voting structure, none of it changed. What changed was the leverage. Stalin's chair stayed empty because he had a choice. His successors filled it because they didn't. What strikes us isn't the hypocrisy, calling something imperialist for 5 decades and then lining up to join it. We've all done versions of that. What strikes us is how quickly "we will never" becomes "we had no choice," and how seamlessly that transition gets filed under necessity rather than defeat. Which makes us wonder, how many of the things you're certain you'd never do are really just things you haven't been desperate enough to do yet?